On this Friday night, mounting questions about safety in BC's backcountry.
In any outdoor activity, you can't eliminate 100% of the risk.
And new details about the victims of this week's deadly avalanche. The biggest storm of the season is slamming into central Canada, grounding flights with a flurry of travel warnings. Painted into a corner, police charge 8 people with art fraud for forging works by a famous Indigenous painter. Plus, a Nobel Peace Prize winner imprisoned.
We are very disturbed at the trial.
The purported crimes and calls for his freedom.
Global National with Farah Nasser. Reporting tonight, Jeff Semple.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. We're learning more tonight about that deadly avalanche in BC that killed 3 people. The victims were German tourists on a Heli-ski tour. Their trip meant to be a celebration for a member of the group who just completed his thesis. He survived, but the others in his party, including his father and brother-in-law, did not. As Heather Yourex-West reports, their deaths are raising questions about tour operators and safety in a deadly avalanche season.
It's the best of what a Canadian winter getaway has to offer. Fresh snow, the promise of a day of fun on the slopes. It was to be a trip of a lifetime for a group of 4 men from Germany. Tragically, only one of the 4 will be making the return trip home.
The only survivor of this avalanche is a 25-year-old man from Iging. His father died in the avalanche. He's 57 years old. And his brother-in-law, who is 34 years old, also died in this avalanche. And the third death is another 57-year-old member of the council in Iging.
The avalanche struck a group of 10 people in the BC backcountry on Wednesday, 9 tourists and a guide on a trip organized by the local tour operator RK Heli-ski. The deaths, the second Heli-ski tragedy in just over a month. A pair of American tourists were also killed in an avalanche while on a Heli-ski trip near Revelstoke, BC.
Nobody goes out there expecting that to happen, and I think that needs to be recognized right out of the gate.
But with a total of 12 people dead in snowslides this season, the industry is facing questions about safety. Heli and cat ski operators are regulated by Helicat Canada. Its 39-member companies guide 120,000 skiers every year.
Every guest wears a pack with a probe, shovel, and also has a radio. In any outdoor activity, you can't eliminate 100% of the risk.
Avalanche Canada says this season has been plagued by 2 deeply buried weak layers across much of Western Canada, making the snowpack very difficult to manage safely. The BC government says it's in regular contact with Avalanche Canada and could close parts of the backcountry for safety reasons if warranted.
We need people to seriously consider and assess the terrain that they are going into and potentially consider delaying their trip until conditions are safer.
For now, though, it's up to users to make the decision for themselves, to take a risk for an adventure of a lifetime that for 12 families so far this year has ended with unimaginable loss. Heather Yourex-West, Global News, Panorama, BC.
Turning east now, Ontario and Quebec are also bracing for some dangerous conditions. A major snowstorm is set to hammer both provinces starting tonight, with forecasts predicting the biggest snowfall this year for the Toronto area. WestJet announcing this afternoon it's being proactive, cancelling all flights to and from Toronto's Pearson International Airport. Those cancellations started at 8 p.m. Eastern Time and will last until Saturday morning, depending on conditions. Global News Chief Meteorologist Anthony Farnell has more on the weather picture. Anthony.
Jeff, this storm has a history of producing some rather remarkable weather. From the beginning of the week, all that snow in BC, then down into California, across the desert southwest of the U.S., and then into the plains with severe weather, including tornadoes. And now, yes, it's Ontario, it's Quebec, and it's not going to be rain or severe storms, but heavy, wet snow that we're anticipating. As we get a little bit closer, show you the radar imagery, there's still a lot of rain, a lot of lightning with this, but it is starting to transition now to snow, and it's just going to pick up in intensity later this evening around Toronto. At times, we could have snowfall rates of 5 to 8 centimeters every single hour, and with that rate, it's very difficult for snowplows to keep keep up. So highways are going to become treacherous out there, and it all pushes towards the east, impacting Kingston. Ottawa and Montreal are on the northern edge, but still snowfall warnings from Environment Canada advising of 15 to 20 centimeters. The good news, if there is any, is that it's March and it's a quick mover. So tomorrow it's back to some sunny breaks, the temperature warms up and the melt begins, but 28 centimeters forecasted for Toronto, a little bit less as you go east. This is also going to impact southern parts of Nova Scotia with a snowfall warning for Yarmouth. So a lot of weather going on. Finally, by late Saturday, this major winter storm will be headed out into the Atlantic. Jeff?
All right, Global News meteorologist Anthony Farnell. Thanks, Anthony. Nova Scotians were on edge this morning after the RCMP issued an emergency alert about a suspect considered armed and dangerous. 37-year-old Gregory Allen Barr allegedly fired at another vehicle on a highway in Colchester County and then drove off. RCMP eventually found and arrested Barr, lifting the alert just after noon. No one was injured, and it's unclear whether that attack was targeted or random. At least 7 people in Ontario are facing multiple charges after a months-long human trafficking investigation that led to the rescue of more than 60 people.
The victims in this case, 64 of them, were subject to deplorable living and working conditions with no way out. This case has affected everyone profoundly. Our members were shocked at the conditions that the victims were living in.
Police raided 5 properties last month in the Greater Toronto area. The victims are Mexican nationals, both men and women allegedly found living in squalor. Police say they were abused and exploited for manual labor at farms, factories, and warehouses in the region. Now, at this point, investigators are not providing the locations or company names, citing an ongoing investigation by the Ministry of Labour. Police in Ontario have also charged 8 people linked to an alleged art fraud ring. The group is suspected of making and selling pieces under the name Norval Morisseau, a famous Indigenous artist. Officers seized more than 1,000 paintings and prints, all believed to be fake. As Eric Sorensen reports, some of the works sold for big money to unsuspecting buyers.
Norval Morisseau's art is world-renowned, the first Indigenous artist in this country whose distinctive style was exhibited in contemporary Canadian galleries and remains beloved 15 years after his death.
He's like, I didn't paint that. I didn't paint that.
But as a 2019 documentary explored, his art also became the target of fraud, fake Morisseau artwork.
This painting is a lie. Someone put Norval's name on it.
Now, after a 2.5-year investigation, Ontario Provincial Police and Thunder Bay Police say they've cracked a major forgery ring, seizing more than 1,000 paintings and prints. 8 Ontario residents, 5 are from Thunder Bay, including a nephew of Morisseau, have been charged.
These contributions and his global success may have made him an easy target for fraud. What you see behind me today represents examples of the types of work made under and profited from Norval Morisseau's name.
Police say one of those arrested, David Voss, began making forgeries around 1996.
He forged some paintings himself before growing his organization into a full assembly line of painters.
Some of the alleged forgeries sold for tens of thousands of dollars. They not only made fake art, but fake certificates attesting to authenticity. John Dellandrea has investigated art forgeries dating back decades to the Group of 7.
This is not a new phenomenon, so it's a function of perception of value and an appetite in the marketplace.
It was a terrible, multifaceted crime that has been going on for decades. And it's great that the police have hopefully cut off some of its many heads.
The Morisseau Project researches and promotes the importance of Morisseau's work. Carmen Robertson was pleased to hear of the police arrests, telling Global News, all efforts to ensure the legacy of his art are welcomed, and I look forward to outcomes of this investigation.
I realize what my purpose is to be.
Norval Morisseau's stature has only grown with time. The hope is that Morisseau's original art, and not the criminal copies, will be the legacy that endures. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
The Prime Minister faced fresh questions today over those allegations of election interference by Beijing, a day after opposition MPs voted to call for an independent public inquiry. The Prime Minister reiterated his government's ongoing efforts to confront the problem. But with the House of Commons set to return next week, the pressure on the Liberals to take tougher action isn't letting up. Our chief political correspondent, David Aiken, reports.
I absolutely hear that Canadians want to be reassured that independent experts are looking at this issue.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has not ruled out an inquiry, but he argued Friday his government is tackling the issue by other means.
All of those goals are related to processes that are ongoing as we speak.
He pointed to the work of two all-party parliamentary committees, to work that was done by independent civil servants. But none of those are set up to investigate allegations of interference with any party's nomination process, processes that are shielded by parties themselves from public scrutiny. And that's where there could be a weakness in Canada's system. For example, as Global News first reported, when Liberal MP Han Dong sought the nomination in 2019 in the Toronto area riding of Don Valley North, the Chinese consulate in Toronto is alleged to have sent 2 busloads of Chinese Canadian seniors to vote for him. That allegation comes from a combination of intelligence sources and CSIS documents. Dong and the Liberal Party of Canada deny the allegations and say the nomination rules were followed. But for the second time this week, Trudeau refused to speak to the allegations about Dong, but acknowledged Canadians of some ethnic groups are more likely to be targets of interference than others.
We know that Chinese Canadian parliamentarians and Chinese Canadians in general are targets, greater targets for interference by China than others.
Trudeau said Iran and Russia, like China, also targets Canadians who come from those countries. All the more reason, the opposition says, to have a fully transparent public inquiry. Jeff?
David Aiken in Ottawa. Thanks, David. Sentencing day in 2 high-profile court cases. Coming up, the punishment for a Nobel Peace Prize winner in Belarus. Plus, a disgraced American lawyer who murdered his family learns his fate.
I'm innocent.
There's international outrage over the fate of a human rights advocate in Belarus who won a Nobel Peace Prize last year while behind bars. Ales Bialiastski has been a pro-democracy activist for decades. He was arrested in 2021 following protests disputing the election of authoritarian President Alexander Lukashenko. Now he's been sentenced to 10 years in prison. But as Mike Armstrong explains, Bialiastski's plight has become a rallying cry for opponents of the Belarusian government.
It is a sentence seen by many as retribution. Ales Bialiastski's years of political activism earning him a political punishment. The 60-year-old was sentenced Friday to 10 years in a maximum security penal colony. The offense, smuggling cash into the country to finance protests against the government. 3 other men, also human rights campaigners, were hit with sentences of 7, 8, and 9 years. UN officials are calling for the men to be released, as well as 1,400 other political prisoners in the country.
We're gravely concerned about the lack of fair trial proceedings and access to an independent judiciary in Belarus.
Bialiastski has fought for human rights in Belarus since the 1980s. He founded a human rights group, Viasna, in 1996, and has been a constant problem for the country's president, autocrat Alexander Lukashenko. Bialiastski was convicted of similar financial crimes in 2011 and spent 3 years in prison. The latest arrest was in 2021 after mass protests against Lukashenko's re-election. Thousands took to the streets while the Belarusian opposition and Western countries called the results a sham.
This year's Peace Prize.
Bialiastski was named as one of the co-winners of the Nobel Peace Prize in October while behind bars. He was praised for never giving up his fight despite the personal hardship it meant. Now, all 3 of the co-winners were related to the ongoing war in Ukraine. One was a Russian human rights group, the other a Ukrainian group documenting war crimes. Bialiastski's selection was called by some a slap in the face for Putin because he's been a major critic of Lukashenko's, the Russian leader's closest ally. The Belarusian opposition leader, now living in exile, called Friday's proceedings a shameful mockery and the men heroes.
They represent the protection of the individual's rights against the repression of the state.
Now, Canada joined a growing chorus condemning the sentences. The foreign minister says Canada stands with the people of Belarus and the men should be released. Mike Armstrong, Global News.
Murdoch murders. Ahead, the sentencing for a once prominent and powerful American lawyer. Welcome back. In the U.S., a disgraced South Carolina lawyer will spend the rest of his life behind bars for killing his wife and youngest son. Alex Murdoch was found guilty on all counts last night. The verdict ends one of the most watched and discussed criminal cases in recent American history. Jackson Prosco reports on the evidence that sealed his fate.
For the murder of Paul Murdoch, whom you probably love so much, I sentence you to prison for murdering him for the rest of your natural life.
Alex Murdoch barely flinched as he was given 2 consecutive life sentences for murdering his son, Paul, and his wife, Maggie. Right up until the very end, he maintained he did not kill them.
I'm innocent. I would never, under any circumstances, hurt my wife, Maggie, and I would never, under any circumstances, hurt my son, Paul.
In sentencing, Judge Clifton Newman was unequivocal that he, like the jury, did not believe Murdoch after a trial in which he admitted to lying repeatedly.
It meant when I lied, I continued to lie.
And the question is, when will it end? When will it end?
Guilty verdict.
Thursday, it took a jury less than 3 hours to find him guilty on all counts.
Justice was done today.
Prosecutors say the prominent South Carolina lawyer embezzled millions of dollars and may have carried out the murders to gain sympathy and delay the investigation into his wrongdoing. It was Murdoch's own testimony, admitting he had lied about being at the scene of the murders that likely sealed his fate. Prosecutors played this video, recorded by his son just before the murders, where Murdoch's voice can be heard.
Everything about me not going to the kennel was a lie.
And you're able to just do that just so easily and so convincingly and so naturally, don't you?
I mean, that's not for me to judge.
The trial drew international attention.
For over a century, the Murdochs were law and order.
And became the subject of a Netflix docuseries, luring in the public with a sordid tale of murder involving a prominent family and a legal dynasty. For weeks, the trial unfolded in the same courtroom Murdoch's father, grandfather, and great-grandfather all tried cases as prosecutors. His lawyers say they'll appeal immediately. Even if successful, that won't save Murdoch from a long legal reckoning. He still faces nearly 100 charges relating to his alleged financial crimes. Jackson Prosco, Global News.
Combating climate change. Next, the fight to preserve one of Canada's key ecosystems. In the fight against climate change, Canada's peatlands play a key role. Canada's home to the world's largest peatland carbon stock, believed to store some 150 billion tons of carbon. But in one region in northern Ontario, known as the Ring of Fire, that crucial storage capacity could be at risk. Krista Hesse traveled to the edge of Hudson Bay, where new provincial mining goals have some sounding the alarm.
This is the world's second largest intact peatland. Stretching from Manitoba to Quebec, scientists are calling it Canada's Amazon rainforest. And like the Amazon, human activity threatens its existence.
We do have to be very careful about any decisions we make about what happens in this region. It is a global treasure that Canada is responsible for.
And the treasure is buried deep underground.
So this is sphagnum moss. As the moss grows, it pushes down layers of vegetation. Over time, the dead plants gradually build up and form peat.
And as this plant matter is building up in forming this peatland, it ends up storing a massive amount of carbon. And that's the power of peatlands.
First Nations in Northern Ontario refer to this carbon sink by a different name,
In our language, the people call it mischak, right? It's the muskeg, it's the breathing lands of Mother Earth.
Billions of tons of carbon will remain stored beneath the surface unless it is disturbed. Drained or damaged peatlands release large amounts of carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere.
That carbon is irrecoverable. Once it's lost to the atmosphere, we just cannot get it back within our lifetimes.
And that matters because a major mining development has been proposed in the Hudson Bay lowlands. Ontario Premier Doug Ford has made opening the region to mining a priority in an effort to establish an electric vehicle battery supply chain. We sat down with Ontario Mines Minister George Peary, who supports the development of the so-called Ring of Fire.
So this project was once valued at $60 billion. Do you have a current valuation?
No, I don't have a current valuation, but anecdotally people are, and the mining people are saying this is $1 trillion project.
We contacted Wyloo Metals, the Australian mining company with the largest deposit holdings in the region, to see what they made of that figure.
A number like that is way exaggerated. The Ring of Fire is a special area, but numbers like that are a little bit silly.
Despite not knowing the value of the minerals underground, Peary says the province still wants to build the $2 billion road network that would connect the mining area to existing highways. But there's concern the roads and the mines, if they go ahead, could lead to unchecked development, turning a globally significant carbon sink into a carbon emitter. Krista Hesse, Global News.
And you can watch Krista's full report on Canada's peatlands tomorrow night at 7 o'clock right here on Global. And that is Global National for this Friday night. I'm Jeff Semple. Tonight's Your Canada is from North Sydney, Nova Scotia. We love seeing your Canada, so please keep sending your photos to viewers at globalnational.com. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you back here again tomorrow. Have a great night.